Sarah Washington's worn sneakers made soft squeaking sounds against the polished marble floors of TechCore Industries. It was 11 p.m., and the 50-story building had emptied hours ago, leaving only the quiet hum of air conditioning and the occasional flash of her cleaning cart's wheels reflecting in the glass walls. At 42 years old, Sarah's face carried the gentle lines of someone who smiled often, despite life's hardships. Her dark hair was always neatly tied back in a practical bun, and her blue cleaning uniform, though old, was pressed perfectly each night. This job at TechCore was her second of the day, the first being at a local coffee shop where she worked from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. Tonight was like any other night. She pushed her cart past the cubicles on the 48th floor, gathering candy wrappers and empty coffee cups that the day staff couldn't bother to throw away properly. A crumpled memo lay on the floor next to a trash can. Someone had thrown it and missed, then simply left it there. Sarah picked it up, smoothing the paper between her fingers before dropping it into her garbage bag. "Take care of it, that's what they pay the cleaning lady for," she muttered to herself, mimicking the words she'd overheard from a young executive earlier that week. The memory stung, but Sarah had learned long ago to let such comments roll off her back like water. What those executives didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah Washington spent her mornings, after her coffee shop shift and before picking up her kids from school, attending MBA classes at the local university. She had saved for 7 years to afford it, counting every penny, taking on extra shifts, and even selling her car to make it happen. Now she rode the bus everywhere, adding 3 hours to her daily commute, but it was worth it. Her hands moved efficiently as she cleaned, spraying and wiping down desks with practiced movements. Her mind, however, was on tomorrow morning's finance class. They would be discussing corporate fraud cases, and she had already read the chapter twice, fascinated by the complex ways companies could hide their wrongdoings in plain sight. As she worked her way through the floor, Sarah noticed the light still on in one of the corner offices. Mr. Thompson, a mid-level manager, had left his desk in complete disarray again. Half-eaten sandwich, papers everywhere, and his expensive suit jacket thrown carelessly across a chair. Sarah sighed and began to tidy up. "Ma'am?" A young security guard appeared at the door. "You don't need to clean that mess. I saw Thompson make it on purpose. He thinks it's funny to give you extra work." Sarah turned to face the guard. Kevin was his name. He was new, and one of the few people who treated her with respect. "It's okay, Kevin," she said with a gentle smile. "This job is putting my kids through school too. My daughter Lisa is top of her class, and my son Marcus just made the honor roll. Every mess they make here is another step toward my children's future." Kevin shook his head. "Still not right, Mrs. Washington. I've seen your textbooks when you study during your break. You're worth 10 of Thompson." Sarah just smiled and continued cleaning. Her mind drifted to her children, Lisa, 14, and Marcus, 12. They were staying with their neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez tonight, like they did every weeknight. The elderly woman had become like a grandmother to them, refusing any payment except Sarah's homemade sweet potato pie once a month. As she finished Thompson's office, Sarah's eyes caught the gleam of the highest floors above her. The 49th and 50th floors, executive territory. Up there, the real power players worked, including CEO James Barrett. She would clean those floors last, as always. The executives might look down on her, but Sarah saw everything from her night shift position. She noticed the nervous conversations, the shredded documents, the late-night meetings. Something wasn't right up there, she could feel it. Her professors had taught her to trust her instincts when numbers didn't add up. And lately, a lot of things at TechCore weren't adding up. Sarah checked her watch. 11:45 p.m. Time to head upstairs. She straightened her uniform, checked her cleaning supplies, and pushed her cart toward the elevator. Whatever was happening on those top floors, she would keep her eyes open. After all, nobody paid attention to the cleaning lady, and sometimes that was their biggest mistake. The elevator doors opened silently onto the 50th floor. Sarah's cleaning cart wobbled slightly as she pushed it into the dimly lit hallway of TechCore's executive level. It was just past midnight, and the floor felt different tonight, tenser, as if the very walls held secrets. CEO James Barrett's corner office stood at the end of the hall, its glass walls offering a stunning view of the city lights below. Sarah noticed something unusual. The office door was slightly ajar, and papers were scattered across the expensive mahogany desk. This wasn't like Barrett, who usually kept his space military neat. "Hello," Sarah called out softly, making sure the office was empty. Only silence answered her. She began her usual cleaning routine, starting with the trash bins. As she bent down to empty the shredder basket, a half-shredded document caught her eye. The word confidential was clearly visible at the top, along with some numbers that made her MBA-trained mind pause. Sarah carefully picked up the piece of paper. Her finance professor's words echoed in her head. "Fraudsters always leave traces. You just need to know where to look." The numbers on the fragment didn't make sense. They showed profits that were impossibly high compared to the market reports she read during her study breaks. Her heart began to beat faster. Sarah looked around nervously, then pulled out her phone and took pictures of the shredded document. She moved to Barrett's desk, where more papers lay scattered. They seemed to have been left in a hurry. The documents told a disturbing story. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through them, her 2 years of MBA studies helping her understand exactly what she was seeing. TechCore's CEO had been cooking the books, showing fake profits while secretly selling off his own shares. It was textbook fraud, just like the cases she'd studied in class. "What are you doing in here?" The sharp voice made Sarah jump. Linda Chen, the chief financial officer, stood in the doorway, her face tight with suspicion. Linda was known for working late, often staying past midnight. "Just cleaning, Ms. Chen," Sarah said calmly, though her heart was racing. She pretended to wipe the desk with her cloth. "Mr. Barrett's office was open, so I thought I should tidy up." Linda's eyes narrowed. "At midnight? The cleaning schedule shows this floor is done at 2 a.m. Sarah forced a smile. "Changed my routine a bit. Some floors were easier tonight, so I'm ahead of schedule." Linda stared at her for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "Fine. But make it quick. And don't touch anything on the desk. Those are confidential documents." After Linda left, Sarah let out a shaky breath. She knew she had stumbled onto something big. The evidence was right here. Falsified profit reports, secret stock sales, hidden accounts. All the signs she'd learned about in her corporate fraud class were staring her in the face. Sarah finished cleaning the office as usual, but her mind was racing. She had 2 young children to support. This job, along with her morning shift at the coffee shop, barely kept food on the table and paid for her MBA classes. If she reported what she'd found, she could lose everything. But if she stayed quiet, she would be letting them get away with stealing from thousands of people. Regular workers who had invested their savings in TechCore stock, believing in the company. People just like her. As she pushed her cart toward the next office, Sarah thought about her children. Last week, her daughter Lisa had proudly shown her a paper she'd written about ethical leadership. "Mom," Lisa had said, "my teacher says doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right." Sarah pulled out her phone and looked at the pictures she'd taken. The evidence was clear. Tomorrow was her day off from both jobs. She would use that time to organize these findings properly. Her professors had always praised her attention to detail in case studies. Now she had a real case in front of her. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. As she rode the bus home at 3 a.m., Sarah held her MBA textbook tight against her chest. For the first time, she realized that her education wasn't just about getting a better job. It was about being prepared for moments like this, moments when knowledge meant power, and power meant responsibility. She had to make a decision, and she had to make it soon. Sarah sat at her small kitchen table early Sunday morning, surrounded by papers and sticky notes. Her children were still asleep in the next room, and the morning sun cast long shadows across her careful notes and printouts. She had spent her entire day off organizing the evidence she had discovered at TechCore. Her MBA textbook lay open beside her laptop, its pages marked with colored tabs. She had been up since 4 a.m., unable to sleep, going through everything she had photographed in Barrett's office. The more she looked, the worse it seemed. "What would Dad say?" she whispered to herself, touching the old photo of her father that hung on the kitchen wall. He had been a bus driver who always told her, "Baby girl, your integrity is the one thing nobody can take from you. You can give it away if you're not careful." The coffee in her cup had gone cold, but Sarah barely noticed. She was too busy making a list of pros and cons about reporting what she had found. On one side of the paper, she wrote reasons to stay quiet. "Could lose my job. Might not find another cleaning position." Coffee shop pay isn't enough alone. MBA tuition payments, kids' school expenses, monthly bus passes, rent due next week. On the other side, she wrote reasons to report. It's the right thing to do. People are losing their savings, could help thousands of investors, setting an example for Lisa and Marcus. Dad would want me to speak up. Can't live with knowing and doing nothing. Might prevent more people from getting hurt. Sarah heard movement from the bedroom. Her children were waking up. She quickly gathered her papers into a folder just as Lisa, her teenage daughter, walked into the kitchen. "Mom, you're already up?" Lisa asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I thought this was your only day to sleep in." Sarah managed to smile. "Just doing some homework, baby. Want some breakfast?" As she made pancakes for her children, Sarah watched them eat and talk about their plans for the day. Marcus wanted to practice for his upcoming math test, and Lisa needed help with her science project. They were good kids, working hard in school, never complaining about their small apartment or having to stay with Mrs. Rodriguez during her night shifts. "Mom," Marcus said suddenly, his mouth full of pancake, "remember when you told us that education means having choices?" Sarah nodded, thinking about the choice now facing her. "Well," he continued, "I told that to my friend Tommy yesterday. His big brother dropped out of school, but Tommy says he won't do that. He says he wants choices like you." Something clicked in Sarah's mind at that moment. She had been teaching her children about making the right choices, about standing up for what's right. How could she now choose to stay quiet about such a huge wrong? After breakfast, she sent the kids to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment to work on their homework. Alone again, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing. Her fingers moved slowly, but surely, as she detailed everything she had discovered. Her MBA training helped her explain the complex fraud in simple terms that others could understand. She had already found the SEC's whistleblower website. Now she just needed to finish her report. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She thought about all the people who had invested their savings in TechCore, believing the lies in those cookbooks. Regular people, maybe cleaning ladies like her, thinking they were investing in their future. Sarah pulled out her phone and looked at her children's photos. Lisa's proud smile when she made honor roll. Marcus's excited face when he won the science fair. She had always told them that education gave people power, the power to understand, and the power to make changes. Now she had both the education to understand what was wrong and the power to do something about it. Sarah took a deep breath and began uploading her evidence to the SEC website. As she clicked submit, she felt a strange mix of terror and peace. Tomorrow, she would go back to her cleaning job as if nothing had changed. She would push her cart, empty trash cans, and wipe down desks. But everything had changed. Sarah Washington, the cleaning lady they all ignored, had just lit a fuse that would soon explode through the halls of TechCore Industries. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah submitted her report to the SEC. She noticed strange changes at TechCore as she pushed her cleaning cart through the familiar hallways. Men in expensive suits she had never seen before were working late into the night. They carried briefcases and spoke in whispers. Sarah kept cleaning as usual, but her eyes and ears were always alert. She had learned in her MBA classes that SEC investigations could take weeks or months. The key was to act normal, to be invisible, something she had perfected over her years as a cleaning lady. One night, while cleaning the 48th floor, she overheard two investigators talking in what they thought was an empty conference room. The whistleblower knew exactly what to look for. One man said, shuffling through papers, "These fraud patterns are textbook cases. Someone here knows their financial crimes." The other man nodded. "But who?" "Everyone in the finance department has been interviewed twice. No one seems suspicious enough." Sarah quietly moved her cart past the door, hiding her small smile. They were looking in all the wrong places. Nobody ever suspected the cleaning lady who studied corporate fraud cases between her shifts. The next day, CEO James Barrett called an emergency meeting. Sarah was cleaning the hallway outside when she saw executives rushing into the main conference room. She could feel the tension in the air. It was thick enough to cut with a knife. Linda Chen, the CFO, looked particularly worried. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and she had dark circles under her eyes. As she walked past Sarah, she didn't even give her usual disapproving look. Something big was happening. That evening, Sarah's phone buzzed during her break. It was an email from the SEC acknowledging that her evidence had launched a formal investigation. They wanted to interview her, but it would be done secretly to protect her identity. As she read the email in the quiet break room, Sarah heard angry shouting from Barrett's office above. She could hear his voice even through the floor. "Find out who did this," he was yelling. "Someone here is a traitor. Check everyone's computers, emails, phone records." Sarah calmly deleted the SEC email and continued eating her sandwich. Let them check. They wouldn't find anything on computers or phones that would lead to her. All of her evidence had come from papers they had carelessly left in trash bins and shredders. The next week, Sarah noticed more changes. Security cameras were being installed everywhere. New guards patrolled the halls. Employees were required to sign new confidentiality agreements. During her morning MBA class, Sarah's professor used TechCore as an example, not knowing one of the students was at the center of it all. "The SEC has launched a major fraud investigation," he explained to the class. "Someone inside the company provided detailed evidence of cooking the books. This whistleblower clearly understands complex financial fraud patterns." Sarah kept her head down, taking notes like any other student. But inside, she felt proud. Her education was making a real difference. That night at work, Sarah cleaned Barrett's office as usual. He was there, looking tired and angry as he worked late. "You're the cleaning lady, right?" he asked, barely looking up. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied quietly. "Been here long?" "5 years, sir." He waved his hand dismissively. "Good, good. At least someone here is trustworthy. These educated types with their fancy degrees, they're the ones you have to watch out for." Sarah nodded politely and continued cleaning, hiding her amusement. If only he knew that the cleaning lady he trusted had spent her morning discussing corporate fraud cases in her MBA class. As she finished her shift that night, Sarah saw police cars parked outside TechCore's building. More SEC investigators were walking in with boxes and briefcases. The investigation was moving faster than she had expected. On her bus ride home, Sarah thought about her children, sleeping safely at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. She thought about her father's words about integrity. She thought about all the people whose savings were invested in TechCore, trusting the company to be honest. The bus passed the university where she took her morning classes. The building's lights were still on, students visible through the windows, studying late into the night. Sarah smiled to herself. Education really was power, but it was how you used that power that mattered most. The investigation was moving forward, and soon everything would change. But for now, Sarah Washington would keep cleaning, keep studying, and keep watching as justice slowly but surely made its way to the top floor of TechCore Industries. The night everything changed started like any other. Sarah pushed her cleaning cart out of the elevator onto the 50th floor at exactly 11:30 p.m. The SEC investigation had been going on for a month now, and CEO James Barrett had been staying later and later at the office. Tonight, his office light was still on. Sarah could see him through the glass walls, pacing back and forth, his tie loose around his neck. She had never seen him look so worried. The company's stock had dropped by 40% since the investigation began. Sarah started her usual routine, cleaning the other offices first. She worked quietly, efficiently, just as she had done for the past 5 years. Her hands moved automatically while her mind wandered to her morning MBA class where they had discussed whistleblower protection laws. At 12:15 a.m., she finally reached Barrett's office. She knocked softly on the door. "Come in," he barked, not looking up from his computer. Sarah entered with her cart, beginning her normal cleaning routine. The security cameras in the corners of the office blinked their red lights steadily. The company had installed them 2 weeks ago, but Sarah knew they would only help her case in the end. "The trash bins are full tonight, sir," she said quietly, reaching for the overflowing shredder basket. Suddenly, Barrett's head snapped up, his eyes focused on Sarah with a strange intensity. "Wait," he said sharply. "What's that in your pocket?" Sarah looked down. Her MBA textbook receipt was sticking out of her uniform pocket. She had been reviewing accounting principles during her break. "Just a receipt, sir," she answered calmly. Barrett stood up, his face red with anger and stress. "Show me," he demanded, walking around his desk. Sarah's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, it's just my personal." I said show me, he shouted, grabbing her arm roughly. The receipt fell to the floor. Barrett snatched it up, his hands shaking as he read it. His eyes widened. Advanced corporate finance? He read aloud, his voice rising. What's a cleaning lady doing with a university bookstore receipt? Sarah stood straight, meeting his eyes. I'm getting my MBA, sir. Night classes. Barrett's face turned an even darker shade of red. How long have you been cleaning this office? 5 years, sir. 5 years, he whispered, then suddenly slammed his hand on the desk. 5 years. You've been going through my papers, haven't you? Reading my documents while you pretend to clean. Sarah remained calm, very aware of the security cameras recording everything. I just do my job, sir. A cleaning lady with an MBA, he spat the words out. You think you're smart? You think you understand what you see here? You're nothing but a. He stopped himself, but Sarah could hear the racial slur he had almost used. She had heard it before, many times in her life. Sir, she said quietly, I should finish cleaning now. You're fired, he shouted, his face inches from hers. Get out, and if I find out you've been snooping. The threat hung in the air. Sarah's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. Are you firing me because I'm getting an education, Mr. Barrett? I'm firing you because you're a lying, sneaking. He grabbed her cleaning cart and shoved it toward the door. The contents spilled across the floor. Sarah watched as her cleaning supplies scattered. She thought about her children at home, about her father's words about integrity, about all the nights she had studied while others slept. Mr. Barrett, she said clearly, knowing the cameras were recording every word, I'll leave now. But remember this moment. Remember how you treated me just for trying to get an education. Barrett laughed harshly. You think anyone will care how I treated a cleaning lady? You think anyone will believe you over me? Sarah walked to the door, then turned back one last time. Yes, sir, I do. Because tomorrow, the board of directors will learn that the whistleblower they've been looking for has an MBA, and she just happened to clean your office every night. She watched as the color drained from Barrett's face. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by fear. You, he whispered. Good night, Mr. Barrett, Sarah said quietly and walked out of the office, leaving her cleaning cart behind. The security cameras blinked steadily in the corners, having captured every moment of the confrontation. Sarah smiled to herself as she walked to the elevator. Tomorrow would be a very interesting day at TechCore Industries. The TechCore boardroom was silent except for the gentle hum of air conditioning. 12 board members sat around the massive oak table, their faces serious as they watched the security footage from the previous night. On the large screen, they could see Barrett shoving Sarah's cleaning cart, his face red with rage, his threatening words clear in the audio. Sarah sat quietly at the end of the table, no longer in her cleaning uniform. Today, she wore a simple black business suit she had bought for her MBA presentations. Her hands were folded calmly in her lap, though her heart was racing. Turn it off, Richard Henderson, the board chairman, said heavily. The screen went black, and all eyes turned to Sarah. Mrs. Washington, Henderson began, you've worked as our cleaning staff for 5 years? Yes, sir, Sarah replied. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. During that time, I'd also completed most of my MBA program, specializing in corporate finance and business ethics. Here are my transcripts. Linda Chen, the CFO, grabbed the transcripts. Her hands shook as she read them. A 3.9 GPA, she muttered. All while working 2 jobs? Sarah nodded. The morning shift at Coffee Bean, then MBA classes, then the night shift here. My children stayed with a neighbor. The board members exchanged glances. Many of them had walked past her hundreds of times, never giving her a second look. Some had even complained about her cleaning, just like Barrett had. Mrs. Washington, Henderson continued, please walk us through how you discovered the fraud. Sarah pulled out more documents, copies of everything she had photographed and collected. Her professors had taught her to be thorough, and she had organized everything perfectly. It started with discrepancies I noticed in the shredded documents, she explained, her voice steady. My corporate fraud professor had taught us about common patterns in financial crimes. The numbers didn't add up. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah walked the board through everything she had found. She used terms from her MBA classes, pointing out specific violations and suspicious patterns. The board members listened with growing amazement as this former cleaning lady demonstrated expertise that matched their own financial advisors. And here, she said, pointing to a document, you can see how Mr. Barrett hit the true numbers while selling his own shares. Classic insider trading pattern, exactly like the cases we studied in class. Mrs. Washington, a board member interrupted. Why didn't you come to us directly? Sarah looked him straight in the eye. Would you have believed your cleaning lady? The same woman you complained about for leaving fingerprints on your glass desk. The board member's face reddened as he remembered his own harsh words to her. Just then, the boardroom door burst open. James Barrett stormed in, his face purple with rage. You can't seriously be listening to a cleaning. Sit down, James. Henderson cut him off sharply. Mrs. Washington has provided the SEC with enough evidence to bring criminal charges against you. The only question now is how much damage you've done to this company. Barrett's face went from purple to white. He looked at Sarah, who met his gaze calmly. This is impossible, he whispered. She's just a what, Mr. Barrett? Sarah asked quietly. Just a cleaning lady? Just a black woman? Or just someone who spent 5 years studying while you were too busy looking down on people to notice? The room fell silent again. Henderson cleared his throat. Mrs. Washington, the board owes you an apology. Not just for Mr. Barrett's behavior, but for how all of us treated you. Your dedication to education while working multiple jobs is admirable. Your integrity in reporting this fraud is exactly what this company needs. Sarah nodded, accepting the apology with dignity. Furthermore, Henderson continued, we would like to offer you a position. Our compliance department needs someone with both your educational background and your demonstrated commitment to ethics. Barrett made a choking sound. 2 security guards had entered the room behind him. You can't be serious, he sputtered. You're going to hire the cleaning lady? No, Henderson replied firmly. We're going to hire the MBA graduate who saved this company from your fraud. And you, Mr. Barrett, are going to be escorted out by security while we contact the SEC. Sarah watched as the former CEO was led away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She thought about her father, about her children, about all the nights she had studied while cleaning these very offices. Finally, someone had looked past her uniform to see who she really was. 1 month after the dramatic boardroom meeting, Sarah Washington walked through the doors of TechCore Industries wearing a navy blue executive suit. Her new employee badge read Director of Ethics and Compliance, a title that still felt strange but wonderful. Her old cleaning cart was gone, replaced by a corner office on the 48th floor. The same floor where, just weeks ago, she had emptied trash bins and wiped down desks. The irony wasn't lost on her. Mrs. Washington? Her new assistant, Jessica, poked her head in. The press is waiting in the main conference room, and your children just arrived with Mrs. Rodriguez. Sarah smiled. She had invited her kids to be present for today's press conference. They needed to see that dreams really could come true, even if the path was long and hard. In the conference room, reporters filled every seat. Camera flashes went off as Sarah entered with Lisa and Marcus behind her. Mrs. Rodriguez, the neighbor who had watched her children all those nights, sat proudly in the front row, wiping tears from her eyes. Richard Henderson, the board chairman, stepped up to the microphone first. Today, TechCore Industries announces major changes, he began. Following the arrest of our former CEO James Barrett for securities fraud, we are implementing new ethical guidelines under the leadership of our new Director of Ethics and Compliance, Sarah Washington. The room buzzed with excitement. The story had leaked to the press days ago. The cleaning lady with the secret MBA who had exposed corporate fraud and risen to an executive position. It was the kind of story newspapers loved. Sarah took the podium, her children watching from the side. The cameras clicked rapidly. 5 years ago, she began, her voice clear and strong. I started working as a member of the cleaning staff here at TechCore. Every night, I cleaned these offices while studying for my MBA during the day. Many people walked past me without a second glance. Some were kind, most were indifferent, and a few were cruel. She paused, looking at her children's proud faces. But education changed everything. My professors taught me to recognize patterns of fraud. My studies gave me the knowledge to understand what I was seeing, and my conscience gave me the courage to report it. The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Today, I'm announcing 3 new initiatives at TechCore, Sarah continued. First, a comprehensive ethical oversight program that will prevent future fraud. Second, a scholarship fund for service workers pursuing higher education. And third, new company policies ensuring that every employee, from cleaning staff to executives, is treated with respect and dignity. The room erupted in applause. In the back, Sarah spotted Kevin, the security guard who had been kind to her during her cleaning days. He gave her a thumbs up. Linda Chen, who had once looked down on Sarah, now sat in the front row nodding in approval. After Barrett's arrest, she had been the first executive to publicly apologize for her past behavior. After the press conference, Sarah took her children to see her new office. Lissa ran her fingers over the nameplate on the door in wonder. "Mom," Marcus said, looking out the window at the city below, "remember when you used to clean this floor? Now you're running it." Sarah hugged her son. "That's why education is so important, baby. It opens doors you didn't even know existed." Just then, Jessica brought in an urgent message. The SEC wanted to honor Sarah at their annual conference. Harvard Business Review wanted to feature her story. A major publishing house was interested in her memoir. But Sarah's attention was on something else. Through her office window, she could see the evening cleaning staff arriving for their shift. They wore the same blue uniforms she had worn for 5 years. "Jessica," she called to her assistant, "please invite all our cleaning staff to have coffee with me tomorrow morning, and enroll anyone who's interested in our new education program." That evening, as Sarah packed up to go home, at a reasonable hour, not at 3 a.m. like in her cleaning days, she stopped by her old break room on the basement level. The cleaning staff was gathering for their shift. "Mrs. Washington," they exclaimed, surprised to see an executive in their break room. "Just wanted to say hello to my former colleagues," she said warmly, "and to remind you that applications for our education scholarship program open next week. Anyone interested in a better future should apply." She looked around the room at their hopeful faces and smiled. Sometimes the biggest changes started in the most unexpected places, like a cleaning lady's dream of education and justice. 1 year had passed since Sarah Washington's life-changing revelation at TechCore Industries. On this bright morning, she stood at a podium in the company's largest conference hall, addressing a very special gathering. "Welcome to the first graduation ceremony of the TechCore Education Initiative," Sarah announced, beaming at the audience. In front of her sat 25 employees wearing graduation caps, all of them from the cleaning staff, security team, and maintenance department. The hall was packed. Family members filled the seats, many holding flowers and balloons. Children waved excitedly at their parents in graduation caps. News cameras rolled in the back, capturing this historic moment. Among the graduates was Kevin, the security guard who had shown Sarah kindness during her cleaning days. He had just completed his associate's degree in cybersecurity. In the front row, Mrs. Rodriguez dabbed her eyes with a tissue, sitting next to Lisa and Marcus, who had grown taller over the past year. 1 year ago, Sarah continued, I stood in this room wearing an executive suit for the first time. Today, I'm even prouder to see 25 of my former colleagues wearing graduation caps. Each of them worked full-time while studying, just like I did. She gestured to a large screen behind her, which showed photos of the graduates at work and in class. Maria from our night cleaning staff is now graduating with her nursing degree, Sarah announced. Tony from maintenance has completed his business certificate, and Kevin from security will join our IT department next month. The room erupted in applause. In the executive section, Richard Henderson and the board members nodded approvingly. The education initiative had not only improved employee morale, but had also discovered hidden talents within their workforce. Linda Chen, who now worked closely with Sarah, stood up to present the graduates with their completion certificates and job promotion letters. The company had created new positions specifically for these graduates, turning their education into real opportunities. After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the building, remembering her own journey. The cleaning cart she had pushed for 5 years was now displayed in a glass case in the lobby, with a plaque that read, "Dreams don't look like what you expect. Sarah Washington's Journey from Cleaner to Executive, 2024. Her old MBA textbooks sat on a shelf in her office, next to framed newspaper articles about TechCore's transformation. The company's stock had recovered and even surpassed its previous highs, thanks to new transparent practices and ethical leadership. James Barrett's trial had ended 3 months ago with a guilty verdict. He would spend the next 15 years in prison for securities fraud. Sarah had testified at the trial, facing her former boss with the same quiet dignity she had shown that night in his office. Back in her office, Sarah found a surprise waiting. Her children had arranged a small celebration with her former cleaning crew colleagues who weren't part of today's graduation. "Next year, that's going to be us up there," said Carmen, who was still mopping floors while studying accounting. "You showed us it was possible, Mrs. Washington." Sarah hugged her former colleague. "Remember what I always say, education is a ladder that anyone can climb if they're willing to work hard." Everyone finished together, laughing. Later that evening, Sarah visited her father's grave. She placed fresh flowers and whispered, "You were right, Dad. Integrity was the best gift you gave me." Her phone buzzed. Another interview request, this time from Time magazine. Her story had inspired similar programs at other companies across the country. Next week, she would speak at a congressional hearing about corporate ethics and worker education. But right now, Sarah had a different priority. She drove to her children's school for Parents' Night. Lisa was now president of the student council, and Marcus had made the math team captain. "Mom," Lisa said as they drove home, "my teacher used your story in class today. She said you proved that no dream is too big." Sarah smiled, remembering all those nights of studying while cleaning, all those mornings at the coffee shop, all those bus rides between jobs. "Nothing is too big," she agreed, "if you're willing to work for it. But remember, success isn't just about rising to the top. It's about bringing others up with you." Marcus finished. "That's what you always say." Sarah looked at her children proudly. Tomorrow, she would return to her executive office at TechCore. She would make more changes, help more people, open more doors. But tonight, she was simply Sarah Washington, a mother who had worked as a cleaning lady, studied for her MBA, exposed corruption, and most importantly, shown others that they too could rise above their circumstances. Sometimes the biggest triumphs come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the person holding the cleaning cart might just be the one holding the keys to change.